Characters with nothing to do, songs that miss the mark, and trying to please everyone. These are just a few of the missteps in Disney's live-action remake of Snow White that are impossible to ignore. Snow White sparked controversy over its approach to portraying the seven dwarfs, who were famously part of the original 1937 movie. On a 2022 episode of the WTF with Mark Maron podcast, Peter Dinklage called out Disney for the inclusion of dwarfs in the film. He mentioned how Disney wanted to be inclusive in one way by casting Rachel Zegler as Snow White, but was also doing something seemingly backwards. He said,
"You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that f***ing backward story of seven dwarves."
While Dinklage wasn't a fan of including dwarfs in the story, other actors with dwarfism insisted this could be a good way for performers with dwarfism to get work in a high-profile project. Instead, Disney did something that makes little sense and hasn't made anyone happy. The seven dwarfs are CGI creations, which makes them look closer to their 1937 counterparts. It's a completely baffling way to go about this controversy. On top of this, Martin Kleba, who has dwarfism, voices Grumpy. So Disney got an actor with dwarfism to voice one of the characters, but not actually play them in person. The other voice actors for the dwarfs in Snow White are individuals without dwarfism. Disney could have been progressive by casting actors with that condition in those roles, but they went down a route that pleased nobody.
It's very disappointing that Snow White chose to not include us.
Gal Gadot plays the evil queen in Snow White, and her performance features a big musical number, All Is Fair. But while the song is clearly going for some sultry vibes, Gadot struggles to bring it to life. Tonally, this song sticks out like a sore thumb, not mixing well with the rest of the soundtrack. The lyrics are equally puzzling. They feature the evil queen providing some good advice to women who want to get ahead, saying that girls who are ambitious must also be vicious. But does she see herself as merely ambitious rather than a dictator ruining the once prosperous kingdom? It could maybe work if the movie provided some backstory to support it. Instead, All Is Fair feels like a tonal mismatch that ultimately offers nothing. Another baffling song in Snow White is Prince's Problems, sung by Jonathan. Jonathan, played by Andrew Burnap, is the bandit who takes the place of the prince as Snow White's true love. He and his fellow rebels reside in the forest, holding out hope that the king is still alive. Snow White eventually frees him, and they reunite in the forest after she runs away. That's when Jonathan sings Prince's Problems, about how there are bigger things going on than whatever she's dealing with. The problem is, there kind of isn't. He's basically telling her that she has first world problems, but this song doesn't make sense given its placement in the film. For one, since they've met before, Jonathan knows that Snow White is being kept as a servant in the queen's palace. Then, right before the song starts, Snow White literally tells him that the queen is trying to kill her. So it seems she probably knows that life isn't fair at this point and doesn't need some jerk singing about it to her. That said, the entire song just feels like Jonathan is downplaying Snow White's struggles. Jonathan also feels constantly out of place in Snow White, offering quippy dialogue in contrast to how earnest the film feels most of the time. And that out-of-place aesthetic extends to his wardrobe. He seems to be wearing a green jean jacket and hoodie. It clashes with Snow White's classic blue, red, and yellow dress straight from the 1937 animated film. Everyone else looks pretty accurate to the original film, but Jonathan looks far too modern. Hoodies technically date back to the 12th century, but even those were more akin to cowls. Hoodies didn't really take off until well into the 20th century, and Snow White is probably supposed to be set in the 1500s, given the style of the garments. Still, Jonathan's outfit makes him look like he's supposed to be in some off-Broadway show that pokes fun at fairy tale musicals. Not to keep picking on Andrew Burnap's Jonathan, but he's a big part of a lot of the dumb elements of Snow White. Jonathan gets partnered up with 6 other bandits in the film who really don't have all that much to do. 2 of them kind of have a love story, while one of them gets set up to be this great crossbow marksman and then fires a crossbow at the end. Other than Jonathan being the love interest, none of them really have any bearing on the plot, and there's a good explanation for why that's the case. This is merely a theory, but given Peter Dinklage's remarks about the portrayal of dwarfs in the film, it seems likely that Disney wanted to distance itself from the 7 dwarfs at first. Maybe Snow White was originally going to spend much of the runtime with 7 bandits instead. This appears even more likely considering the casting of George Appleby, an actor with dwarfism, as Quig. This could have been a way for Disney to reference the seven dwarfs without having all of them in there. Further down the line, Disney may have gotten cold feet about not including the seven dwarfs and threw them in anyway. Of course, this is all speculation, but it would explain why the bandits have pretty much nothing to do throughout the movie. Jonathan's presence makes sense as a new love interest for Snow White who gets to spend more time with her before reviving her via a kiss. It'd be a little weird if he was hanging out in the woods all by himself. At the end of the day, his fellow bandits just needed more to do. The standout supporting character in 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is Grumpy. Living up to his name, he's the bitter dwarf who just wants Snow White to get out of his home. Sometimes his feelings toward her come across as extremely sexist, like when he exclaims,
"And all females is poison. They're full of wicked wiles."
However, by the end of the film, he comes to care for Snow White and even cries when he believes she's died. Grumpy in 2025's Snow White has no such arc. He doesn't like Snow White at first, but is sad after she eats the evil queen's poisoned apple. There's no arc or character development, he just likes her all of a sudden. This is likely due to Dopey getting more of an arc in the live-action remake. Snow White teaches him that he doesn't have to be afraid of speaking his mind, and by the end, he's made great strides. It's a fine arc, but the fact that it comes at the expense of Grumpy's development makes the whole thing feel a little anticlimactic. We can't say for certain, but it's possible that Grumpy's role was minimized to avoid him saying sexist things. Maybe the behind-the-scenes team just wanted to give Dopey time to shine. But it does seem like an attempt at sanitizing Grumpy. Instead of having him see the error of his ways, the 2025 film simply axes this part of him. Jonathan may have more to do in 2025's Snow White than the prince did in the original, but that development actually hinders one of the most iconic moments from the story. Perturbed by Snow White, the evil queen transforms into an old hag to trick the princess into eating a poisoned apple, which puts her into an eternal slumber where she can only be woken up by true love's kiss. In the 1937 film, the queen believes Snow White will be buried before anyone can kiss her, and with the prince as a non-factor, it would make sense for her to believe that no one loves Snow White.
Now take the apple, dearie, and make a wish.
Making Jonathan so prominent in the remake actually makes the queen look like an idiot for pursuing this plan. She knows Jonathan loves Snow White, and instead of killing him to ensure he can never break the spell, she puts him in a dungeon that he easily escapes from. Naturally, he does indeed find Snow White to undo the curse. Creating a curse that can be broken by true love's kiss is already a pretty big risk, but it's a more understandable plan in the original film. By fleshing out Snow White's romantic subplot, the remake makes the queen look pretty dumb. One would assume she had other spells she could use to get Snow White out of the picture that didn't have a massive reset button. Or, the queen could have simply stabbed Snow White and been done with it. She wanted Snow White's heart in a box earlier. Why is she taking such risks the second time around? In the beginning of the film, Snow White receives a necklace from her father in the shape of a heart. The necklace reads, "Fearless, fair, brave, true," as a reminder to Snow White of the qualities she should live by. At the end of the day, this is a children's movie, so really hammering home the themes can be forgiven to an extent. However, this isn't the first time Disney has been so on the nose in its live-action remakes. The live-action Cinderella sees the heroine be told to have courage and be kind. Similarly, 2020's Mulan sees the words loyal, brave, and true printed onto Mulan's sword. At a certain point, it just starts to feel lazy, with these movies going out of their way to explain precisely what adjectives the princess needs to embody. This isn't meant to be a critique of abiding by those lessons. It is, of course, very good to be both courageous and kind, and being fearless and loyal is something to aspire to. Yet, at a certain point, it really exposes how all of these Disney live-action remakes are following the same playbooks. In the case of Snow White and Mulan, the heroines even share two of the same adjectives. Snow White and Mulan are very different characters in their animated forms, but in live action, it seems as though everyone's the same, at least when it comes to heroines. According to various reports and rumors, Snow White underwent several different reshoots, and even though we can't know for sure what was changed from the original iteration, it's apparent from the finished product. The movie is ultimately a tonal and thematic mess that can never seem to figure out what it wants to be.
This is my kingdom.
You dare to disobey me.
It clearly wants to pay homage to the original at points, with Rachel Zegler literally wearing a carbon copy of Snow White's dress. It wants to have political themes, with Snow White encouraging the villagers to stand up to their fascist ruler. It wants to be the same, but different. It wants Snow White to not care about finding true love, but also love is very important. It wants to have dwarfs, but not cast actors with dwarfism to play them. It has classic Snow White songs, but also songs that seem to deconstruct princess narratives, like Princess Problems. Snow White is a film at war with itself. Other Disney remakes have gotten by with copying most of the original and adding an extra song and a couple of new scenes here and there. It's not great, but at least it appeals to people who just want to see what they love. Snow White is trying to make everyone happy, and it ends up pleasing no one as a result.